This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Steve Devereux, the commercial manager for Bristol Flyers. He discusses the concept behind Bristol Sport and what it entails for all the clubs involved, the marketing and growth of UK basketball, and how globalisation has affected player skill set. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Steve, first of all, appreciate you jumping on. I guess the first question is, how are you? And the second question is, are we happy the Lakers won, or were we hoping Miami would win?
I'm quite happy Lakers won. I'm a big LeBron fan. So I always watched him. He's one of the real reasons I got into basketball back when he was with the Cleveland Cavaliers the first time. So, he's bounced around to a few teams, and I've sort of watched all of those whilst trying to stick with Cleveland Cavaliers, but it's not been easy. They've been pretty poor since he left. So, yeah, I'm happy he won, definitely.
Cool. So how are you? How are things? Obviously, we're just about to go into another lockdown, which I'm sure everyone's thrilled about. But yourself, are you all okay?
Yeah, it's been really, it's been tough on more on a job level than a personal level, to be honest. Just the uncertainties. We've never had anything like this since I started working in sport. Just constantly seems to be changing every day. What we think we can do, what we can't do. We were just about ready to welcome fans to games before they cancelled the test events, and then obviously now, as we speak, we're basically waiting to hear from the government if the BBL and professional basketball can carry on through this lockdown period, which we're hopeful it can. So it's been pretty up and down, and it's been very tough to do our sort of normal work in the same way.
So obviously, for the, I guess, more astute listeners, knowing about the Lakers, they would know we're talking about basketball. Obviously, you work over kind of in Bristol. Do you want to explain to people kind of what your roles are? I guess how you got into it to a certain degree.
Yeah, so I work at Bristol Sport, which for people that knows is quite a unique organisation in the way that it's got multiple professional sports under one sort of umbrella organisation. So my primary role is commercial manager of Bristol Flyers basketball, but I also work in the Bristol Sport activation team. So that covers sort of account management and all the sponsorship inventory for all of our partners across, Bristol City, Bristol Bears, both of the women's teams, and Bristol Flyers basketball. So with Bristol Flyers, my job is more around managing the partners, looking at game days, looking at ways we can sort of grow off the court. So working with the Bristol Sport marketing teams and social media and communications teams. But then also the operations, so working with the team, to make sure that they can try and focus on the court. So me and the people at Bristol Sport can look after off the court. And that's sort of the Bristol Sport concept, really. But as I said, Bristol Sport's a really unique one where I'm able to have that Bristol Flyers role, but also on the commercial activation side, get involved with the rugby and the football side of the business too. So that's nice. It's nice and varied, and it's something that you don't come across much in England. So
do you want to explain exactly what Bristol Sport is? Because obviously I kind of follow sport and I have a kind of gauge of what it looks like, but I probably don't understand the full force of it, if you like, or the full concept of it. So do you want to explain kind of exactly what it is? And then I also guess where the idea was developed from.
Yeah, so the concept of Bristol Sport is you've got each of the clubs. So you've got Bristol Bears, Bristol City Football Club, and Bristol Flyers. And the concept is that those teams should just have to focus on, on the pitch or on the court. So if you're Bristol City, you're focusing on signing players, training players, developing players, the academy and everything else, and then winning games, winning matches. And with Bristol Bears, it's the same. What you get at a lot of sports clubs is, if for example, your marketing and your commercial are all part of the same organisation, you've sort of got a bit of a split focus, and sometimes some of the performance staff get dragged into the more commercial activities and you get a bit of crossover. So Bristol Sport is effectively there to be the commercial arm of all of those clubs. So Bristol City go out and worry about, beating Huddersfield, and things like that. and then they have through Bristol Sport, there's a marketing team, communications team, social media teams, video teams, ticketing, IT, HR, everything else that a club would normally have under the same banner Bristol Sport take that away from them so that they can just focus on that. And obviously the big benefit of this is that it's a lot more efficient in terms of the fact that you can have one Bristol Sport marketing team can look after, 4 or 5 clubs, rather than each of those clubs having their own marketing team, their own IT team, their own HR team. It means you could be, we have one office, for example, at Ashton Gate Stadium. It's more of an efficient way of using resources, and it also means that each of the clubs can benefit from the expertise of other clubs. So, if you have one person in one of the clubs who's really good at video and makes things like the GIFs that went viral, they can speak to the other clubs and they can all benefit from that, from that skill set, really.
Where did the concept come from? How did that idea come about?
So the idea came up, the story goes that Steve Lansdowne, who is the owner of Bristol Sport, was in Barcelona, and I believe he did the stadium tour. And I've done the stadium tour myself. And when you expect to go in and just see, loads of Messi shirts and everyone talking about Barcelona football, but actually there's a handball section, there's a basketball section, and you realise, actually it's it's not just football that they do at Barcelona. And as you may know, lots of teams in Europe run this model where you have a club like Real Madrid or Bayern Munich, but actually it's not just Bayern Munich football. They'll have other clubs, and in EuroLeague basketball, you've got now Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona. Like you say, they'll also have maybe handball teams and some other sports, all under the same banner and branding of, say, Barcelona. And I think that idea struck a chord with Steve, and thought, well, in Bristol, you've got a rugby team, you've got Bristol City football, and you've got Bristol Flyers basketball. What if that concept could work in Bristol? But the thing that we did differently, which I personally quite like, is that each team still kept their own identity. Each club having their own identity, it means you can have Bristol Bears fans going to, we can have Bristol Rovers fans going to Bristol Bears games, and it just means that you don't have to be a Bristol City fan to support the wider sports in the group. So it makes it much more inclusive for the city.
Yeah, and I think you've answered my question as to why Bristol City rather than Bristol Rovers. It's obviously if the chairman of Bristol City was the one who came up with the concept. I guess for you guys, have you seen much crossover of expertise? I know you've mentioned a little bit of the marketing department there, but have you seen any real benefits in that aspect?
I think definitely. I mean, I'm put on a really simple level. If our head of marketing has an idea and they try it for one of the clubs and it works, for example, they're going to use it for the rest of the clubs. One of the really good examples we have is our Joel Osborne, who works in the Bristol Flyers media team. He was he was really an early adopter of the GIFs. We were using those for the basketball. So then, Joel was able to work with the other clubs, and all the clubs started using GIFs. And then when Bristol City beat Man United, which was a tough day for me because I'm a Man United fan. But when they won that game, for example, I mean, the GIFs, from the Joe Bryan and the Corey Smith goal, got millions and millions of views. They were shown on Sky Sports News, they were shown on Soccer AM, and that's just an example how, if we were all working in silos in different clubs in Bristol, someone at Bristol Flyers has that idea, but the other clubs don't necessarily pick that up. And then from a performance level as well, and Bristol Bears just built a new training ground, which is, supposedly one of the best in the world. So there'll be technology and processes and equipment, I'm sure, at that facility, which, if it's working well for that team, they can share that expertise with Bristol City, for example, and they can look to adopt that, process or technology as well.
And is it something that you've seen? Obviously, it's quite widely used, I guess, in Europe, like you've mentioned earlier. Is it something that you've seen clubs or people in this country take interest in terms of using it themselves?
I think people have an interest in it, and on paper, it works perfectly. It makes perfect sense. I think the difficulty is we're in quite a unique situation where you know, are, like you said, Steve Lansdowne has had this vision, he's executed it, and he's been able to do all that. The tough thing is in other cities, for example, is if you've got a big football team and you've got a big rugby team, for example, for those two to pair together, it's a lot of people don't like giving up control, or you know, that it's very tough to have two clubs that will have competing interests, and you know, they'll both see themselves as the priority, because that's what you do when you run a business or you run a sports club, working together. There's always going to be competing, you know, views. For example, you know, pitch use, for example, fixtures, trying to accommodate, you know, a rugby team and a football team on the same stadium, on the same pitch. You know, to make things like that work, you've really got to be working in the same direction. And you know, us already having the same owner for multiple clubs means that that's possible. But I think it's difficult with other clubs who are owned separately, and they might be running very different ways, suddenly coming together and having to agree on doing everything the same way. For example, you know, if they're going to use the same ticketing model, the same marketing model, the same communications model, it becomes very different to align even two clubs, yet alone 3 or 4 clubs. And you know, Bristol Sport, if you include, you know, Bristol City women, Bristol Bears women, you know, you've got 5 clubs plus the stadium, which you know is a 365-day event venue as well. There's so many different cogs and different parts that have to all work together in the same direction for it to work, and there not be, you know, internal struggles and things that get in the way of it all working positively.
So how do you manage that struggle? Because I'd imagine, you know, if you've got, you know, Bristol Bears have got a game on a Saturday at 2, and then you've got Bristol City men's who've got a game at 3, obviously you're marketing to, I guess, compete in products. So how does that work in your environment?
I think the benefit is with Bristol, you know, City and Bristol Bears, they're never going to have a game at the same time, because obviously they play at the same venue on the same pitch. So there's that benefit there. Sometimes, for example, we'll have a clash where Bristol Flyers will have a home game on a Friday night at SGF College Arena where we play, and Bristol Bears might have a home game at Ashton Gate Stadium. So there is always slight clashes, but it's just something that you have to manage in terms of there's always give and take. A lot of the time, you know, the clubs have to accommodate each other for fixtures. A game for one club might have to move because, for example, Bristol City have advanced in the FA Cup. So I think it's give and take, but I think again, it all starts at the top. And if the people at the top want it to work for all these clubs and want everyone to be pulling in the same direction, that filters down and everybody accommodates that vision. That might not be the case if you have multiple clubs with different visions and different owners. It can become quite difficult, I think.
Yeah, and so moving, I guess, slightly to the marketing side, obviously you said there, and that's kind of the area that you work in. How in a basic premise, how do you go about getting bums on seats? Obviously, I know it's a little bit more difficult in COVID, but how do you go about, you know, promoting your products in a way that represents them and the Bristol Sport brand accordingly?
I think it's different for each club. I mean, for Bristol Flyers basketball, obviously we're a different proposition to rugby and football in the way that we know that if we get someone to come watch a game, they'll really enjoy it, and we know that there is, you know, an interest in basketball across the UK. But it's one thing, you know, somebody having an interest in basketball, and another than paying money to come and see something or finding out about it when other games, where is it? So for Bristol Flyers, you know, one of the big things we need to do is create awareness that there is a professional basketball team in Bristol. It is a top flight basketball team. But the funny thing with Flyers is that last season we sold out every game. So on one hand, we want to create this real buzz and we want to tell everyone about British basketball and Bristol Flyers and who we are. But on the other hand, if I tell you about that and then you say, great, when can I watch a game? Well, the next 2 games might be sold out. And that's why, you know, Bristol Sport are looking to build a sports and convention centre next to Ashton Gate Stadium, which will, you know, up our capacity from, you know, circa 800 to, you know, circa 3,000. And that gives us a complete, because then we can really push the marketing out there and say to people, well, now we're telling you about it, but now you can go and watch games because we have that capacity. So with Flyers, it's all about creating awareness. showing people what the product is, where it is, and how they can access it. For Bristol City and Bristol Bears, as you know, it's very different. You know who Bristol City are. You probably know who Bristol Bears are. So the marketing becomes telling people about what fixtures are coming up, and it might, there might be a game against Bath, so suddenly it's a big rivalry game, or a game against Exeter or Gloucester, so it's a Southwest rivalry game, or it might be a big European fixture. So it becomes about sort of marketing the fixture as an event, I guess, and telling people what's coming up, and what big players we might be playing, or a new signing starting for us. Is it so and so's first game back from injury? And that's sort of how the games are marketed. Obviously the mechanics behind that go into using social media marketing. So obviously sports clubs and businesses are really good now at using targeted Facebook marketing, for example. And then the more traditional stuff, I mean, if you go around the city of Bristol, you'll see through Cabot Circus, you'll see the sort of bus stop billboards, electronic billboards, showing artwork and video sort of gifs of upcoming fixtures, just trying to let everyone in Bristol and the wider area know what fixtures are coming up for them to watch.
And do you have analytics to figure out where your audiences are engaging with different marketing types?
Yeah, I think anything digital these days, there's analytic tools attached to it, whether it's built into the software itself, so like the social media platforms, or whether it's extra software. There's always ways to track. I mean, things as easy as if me or you post something on social media now, you can see if it's done well or not just by if people are liking it or people are sharing it or retweeting it. It's exactly the same for sports clubs, whether it's a personal athlete trying to market themselves, or it's a sports club trying to market themselves, or a fixture. There's always analytics to say what's working, what's not working, and obviously if sports clubs are putting messaging out, they want to know what people are enjoying and what people are actually receptive to, so then they can put more of that out rather than trying different methods that maybe aren't working as well.
And obviously you've gone back to the GIFs and stuff, which did take off. I think everyone saw that, and on my timelines and feeds, I was seeing all the GIF stuff pop up. Kind of going back, how do you get ideas like that? How do you sit down and come up with something and go, actually, they might be able to engage with this? Is it more of a luck of the draw to whether people do engage with it, or is it targeted using the analytics that you've managed to gather?
I think the analytics will tell you basic things such as are people more receptive to video rather than artwork, or are people more receptive to seeing a video going out, or a piece of artwork advertising a fixture on the weekend, or are they more receptive on a Monday morning before work, or on their lunch break at work? It can tell you things like that. In terms of the actual content, I mean, I think a lot of it in the age of social media now, it's a copycat culture. So someone will have an idea and it'll work well, and then other clubs will then adopt that idea. And in my experience, America, maybe just because it's so much bigger, obviously your odds are much better of hitting a gold mine of an idea. But the American sports teams, I think, are brilliant at coming up with things like, that's the first place I saw the GIFs anyway. Sort of the moving team lineups that you see on Sky Sports when people walk in and cross their arms and things like that. A lot of that I usually tend to see in America first, and then it sort of filters through to English sport. So I think a lot of it is that it's being online and seeing what other clubs are doing and what's working well. But the other thing that works really well is being reactive. So a lot of the times, the clubs at Bristol Sport will announce players, announce new signings in quite creative ways. It's something that Bristol Bears especially have become renowned for. Bristol Flyers,
what type of things have they done?
They're usually like movie scenes, like editing a player's face into a movie scene, or with Bristol Flyers, we announced a player where it was sort of a Love Island. So it was near the time Love Island was on and everyone was watching it and talking about it. So we announced a player and sort of said, this player is Coach K's type on paper, and then their head was on one of the the people that got selected. And that went down really well. We just actually announced our Bristol Flyers fixtures for the BBL Cup, and it's actually it's like a fake Tinder app. So it's the other clubs in the league and it's sort of swiping right if we're playing them, swiping left if we're not. And so different things like that. It's using things that are topical or things that, you know, probably will try and go a little bit viral, because if it's going viral and people like the content, it's also telling people these are our fixtures coming up. But it's a fun bit of content that they want to share and interact with anyway. You know, tag friends in. It's all about, especially for the basketball, it's all about exposure. The more people that know about it, our odds of people, you know, wanting to come and watch a game go right up.
I guess that's one of the more fun parts of your job, right?
Yeah, and it's not something I do specifically myself, but we sort of, you know, it's all about coordinating it internally. Just making sure that we're all, you know, we're all doing it on the same page and you know, working towards the same goals. And that stuff's great. You know, anything creative, anything that's funny and goes viral, you know, on social media is brilliant for us, and the players like it as well. And I think around the league, Bristol Flyers as well have got, and Bristol Bears and the other clubs have got a reputation now of trying to think outside the box, come up with content and reacting to trends. I think, you know, the audience is getting younger and younger for clubs, especially on social media. That's where the next generation of fans are going to come from, and I think they're a lot more likely to interact with things like this than maybe a big billboard in town, than the more traditional methods of sort of, you know, mail outs and things like that.
And is there any, obviously you've mentioned there that America and in American clubs, they do it particularly well. Is there anyone that you look at as like kind of the gold standard in this type of stuff?
I think for artwork and the sort of the execution of how they put graphics together and how they create content around game day, I think Ohio State University football is so a college football team that I was recommended to follow, and a few of the media guys at Bristol Sport follow. They're brilliant, quite niche, I know, but to be honest, any of the you know, the basketball teams, the NFL teams, the standard all round's really good. And you're seeing it now filter into the Premier League. I mean, clubs like Wolves that, you know, are becoming established Premier League teams now. The content they're putting out is great. Southampton Football Club, especially, they're someone that gets a lot of plaudits for sort of. I mean, they did a spoof video of the Firefest, and that was really good. I could tell you've seen that by your reaction. Yeah. And videos like that are great because they engage people that as well aren't just into that specific football club or even into football. But it creates a buzz, and it works around the excitement of sport away from the match day or the game day. And I think they're the type of things we need now to sort of build interest, especially at the moment when people can't go to games.
So how are the challenges at the moment? Because that was going to be my next question. Obviously, you're creating buzz, or, you know, there's a new signing and stuff that ideally people would want to go and see play. They can't. So how's that affecting kind of that side in terms of the buzz created, etc.?
At the moment, the difficulty is, again, different for each sport. So Bristol Bears were able to finish their season last year, albeit very late, and they're starting again soon. So for them, the games are happening as normal. Same with Bristol City, and you know, they played last night. The games are happening. For Bristol Flyers, we were supposed to start the season a few weeks ago, but we've actually had a case of COVID within the team. So we've then had to, you know, the rule is at the moment, because there's so many fixtures to fit in, the BBL Cup fixtures, which is a cup competition at the start of our season. If you can't basically field a team, you have to forfeit the game. So it's tough for us because we haven't bounced a ball and we're, you know, 0 wins, 2 losses. So that's obviously difficult. We've obviously been putting out loads of content, showing our fan base that we're ready to go. We've announced all our signings, you know, we've announced the kit, all the excitement was building. And whilst fans couldn't come, you know, we were streaming the games and everyone was ready to watch those games. We've had to obviously cancel those 2 games, which means that our first game now isn't until the 13th of November. So that'll be our next game, and that'll be our first home game. So the tough thing for us at the moment is we're creating a buzz, and then suddenly, oh, there's been a delay because of this or that. And now, obviously, with the lockdown measures, it just makes things even more uncertain. So at the moment, we try and create as much of a buzz as we can with the content, and the guys in our media team will you know, go down and film training videos, pre-match interviews, and all the traditional things, you know, that you can imagine, and match previews. But yeah, it's all about keeping that interest there, so that when we can go, which is hopefully be very soon now, the fan base is ready for it. They're informed. They know, who's going to be playing, how they can watch it, and the implications of those games.
And how has the challenges been in terms of streaming? Because obviously I know that particularly in football at the moment, there's a little bit of backlash regarding the fee that people have to pay on top of their Sky subscription or BT subscription. How has the challenges been for you guys in terms of setting up a stream and obviously making it usable for those that want to watch it and all that type of stuff?
So for Bristol Bears, BT Sport obviously have the coverage of the rugby. So the other games have usually been made available on sort of a red button type system. So, I mean, fans have been able to watch pretty much every Bristol Bears game through BT Sport. So not much would have changed there. Obviously for Bristol City, they've had to go down the model of, again, similar fans paying for matches. I think the software that was set up hasn't been too difficult again for us, because we're quite lucky that we've got the expertise cross sport. We have people that work, full time in these areas in the business, and also companies we work with that can fill the gaps that we don't have in expertise. I think it would have been more difficult for some other clubs. And as you go down the pyramid in sport, it will become more and more difficult due to less full-time staff, or less resources, less money to buy the infrastructure needed. In basketball, that's what's the challenge has been in basketball, is everyone just getting, at the moment, I think games are streamed with automated cameras at venues. So a lot of the clubs already have those installed, which is good, but it's just translating that technology into, if you can only watch a stream and you can't go to games, obviously everyone wants the standard to be a bit higher. So that's what we're trying to do across the league, is raise that standard. I know from our point of view, we've gone from the game just being streamed and us having a commentator to, pre-match VTs, adverts in between breaks, more graphics, more like videos of the players spliced into the footage. So it becomes more like you're watching a game on, Sky Sports or BT Sport, rather than watching it on YouTube as sort of a traditional live stream. So I think everyone's had to do it very quickly as well. Obviously the BBL season's now started, so it's something that we have had to get in place quite quickly, and different clubs would have been able to cope with that in different ways, but hopefully everyone will be ready to go from from our perspective from next weekend forward anyway.
And I guess one of the challenges is you're trying to do all this whilst socially distanced, if you're recording stuff, or on limited budget with current COVID climate and all that type of stuff. I guess that's what the issues a lot of clubs are facing as well. Yeah,
it is. It changed the amount of measures, and it's obviously great. You need to put the measures in, but it's there's so much you've got to think about. And we were with Bristol Flyers specifically. We thought we were going to have fans at our first game until about 2 weeks before that game. So everything that we were preparing, one-way systems around the venue, changing the layout to keep the players further away from the fans, and we'd done so much planning, and then we found out that the test events in other sports had been cancelled, and obviously the government announcement was there won't be any test events, there won't be any fans at sports. Completely changed the scope of what we were doing. So now it's obviously there's not as much challenges, because of welcoming fans will be will take the most planning. It's obviously where we all want to get to, but at the moment that's not what we can do. So yeah, it's just, when we're interacting with the players and things like that, you just have to put lots of processes in place to be as safe as possible. Even something as simple as getting a shirt signed for a sponsor becomes, there has to be a process in place. You can't use the same pens and different. It really comes down to everyday things. You really need to change the way you do everything. And obviously, I know our team at the moment are having Zoom calls, to arrange, strategy behind the games that are coming up, and it's just a completely different world, isn't it?
And is there anything that you guys will take away from the marketing work that you've done that you'll carry on doing even when this all goes back to normal?
I don't think the digital side of things will change too much, because obviously it is a socially distanced activity of us putting content out for a social audience. I think there are things that will help. I think things like having I think the way of working, a lot of people, a lot of remote working, a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of meetings to arrange things when people are in different places. We had, for example, our coach, Andreas Kapoulas, was the England coach at the Commonwealth Games. So, he would have been out of the country for part of the season in Australia, and things like this. If Zoom and things like that had been more commonplace, then I think they would have found that so much easier. Things like players being on international duty for Bristol City, but still needed to be in contact, and maybe attend team meetings and things like that while they're away. I think you've got so much more options now with everyone. I'd never really heard of Zoom before COVID-19 really, and I think a lot of people are in the same boat. And I think remote working's helped a lot in terms of the day-to-day operations, how we do things when people are in different locations. Might have someone getting treatment for an injury abroad or in a different hospital in a different part of the UK. I think it's going to help teams operationally and businesses operationally work better together. I think that's going to be the big takeaway from lockdown, I think.
Cool. So I guess moving forward, if you want to explain kind of the setup of the BBL and kind of what teams and stuff are in it, because obviously there might be some people in here that don't necessarily follow UK basketball, so it'd be interesting to see how it's dispersed over the country and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, so the BBL is the British Basketball League, and it's a top flight league in Britain. There's one team from Scotland, which is Glasgow Rocks. And then apart from that, the rest of the teams are based in England. You've got, Plymouth Raiders and Bristol Flyers in sort of the southwest. You've got teams in the Midlands. You've got Worcester, and you've got Leicester Riders, Newcastle Eagles. So you've got countries sort of teams spanning across the country. It's a format where teams play each other throughout the season. There's a cup competition and a trophy competition, and then as is traditional with the more American sports, at the end of the season there's the playoffs, and everything becomes about the playoffs. Even if you finish first in the league, you do get plaudits for finish first in the league, but everybody wants to win the playoffs. And there's 3 major finals events. So we have the BBL Cup, the BBL Trophy, and the playoff final all take place in arenas across the UK. So the O2 Arena in London holds the playoff final, for example. And all those events are usually sellouts. They're shown on BBC, on the red button and things like that. So everything we do in the season builds up to those 3 big events, which at the moment, obviously, wouldn't have the fans that they usually would if things carry on the way they are. But yeah, that's sort of the league setup. And in terms of players, there's homegrown players who will play for those clubs, but a lot of the league, similar to other sports leagues, will be import players. We get a lot of players from America play across the league. We're an attractive league for American players because obviously we're an English-speaking country. For those of you who don't know, obviously you've got the collegiate system in America. The NCAA has all these great players, but a very small percent make it to the NBA, say, or the NFL. And lots of those players still want to go pro. So then they look to, Europe, Australia, South America, to go and ply their trade for clubs all around the world. So, yeah.
So how were the team destinations made up? Was it just the areas and people that had interest, or was there a more strategic look at that?
It's a lot more organic than that. If the BBL was starting from scratch, you're seeing it with the Big Bash League and cricket now, aren't you? When a new, not the Big Bash League, sorry, what's the 100? The 100, that's it. Sorry, with the 100 in England, that if you create a league from scratch, you can go, okay, where do we strategically want to put teams and things like that? With the BBL, it's grown more organically than that. So there would have, if you want to be in the BBL, you have to have the infrastructure. So you have to have a talent pool of players coming through that you can access. So usually an academy or a partnership with an academy. You have to have a venue that's, up to standard to play games in, that can hold the requisite amount of fans, and looks a certain way on camera and things like that. And the big one is, you have to have the resources. So you have to have, a management structure or an ownership model or the reserves to run a basketball team. From day one, to be able to pay the salary of a basketball team, to be able to operate, pay the operating costs associated with running a sports club in the UK. So it's not so much a case of, let's put pins on the map and say, well, we'd like to have teams. I think there's areas where the league would like to have teams now. there's obvious gaps, so that there's not a team in Wales, there's not a team in Birmingham. There was in the past. So I think the hope is long term that we get more teams in the BBL and in more areas in the UK, but teams have to have the resources to do that.
And then so in terms of like owners and stuff of teams, is it just people that obviously are pretty wealthy and have an interest in basketball, or is it other areas? Because I know if you look at it in comparison to maybe the NBA, they're highly sought after. You've got people like Mark Cuban, who's a multi-millionaire, and the profile of the NBA is almost a kind of investment, as well as them having to pay out salaries, etc. What does that look like in the BBL?
It varies quite a lot. You have a lot of teams that have built up to the level where they can be a BBL club over many, many years. So that would have usually started, at a very amateur level. It would have been creating a club, creating an academy, getting to a point where you go up the leagues. So there's a national league structure in England, below the BBL, where it varies year on year, but you have a few different divisions, and obviously Division 1 is the top division. And a lot of clubs like Bristol Flyers, for example, they were a Division 2, Division 1 team, and then you become a really competitive Division 1 team, and then you want that next step, and that next step is the BBL. You can't get promoted into the BBL. You have to apply to be in the BBL, and you have to, you're almost setting it up as a new BBL franchise, even though you're an existing basketball club. So some of the clubs, have grown organically out of that, where they've been, a basketball team for all these years, and they've gathered enough support and enough expertise and enough success to then want that next step. And then, financially, it can be, organically built up from that. So, even in the lower leagues, if you're selling tickets to games, you're selling sponsorship, and you're getting bits of investment from different places because you're building up a profile in that city, you might then be ready to go up. In other cases, in our case, for example, Bristol Flyers was acquired, as part of Bristol Sport. So, that becomes, Bristol Flyers have grown to a level where they were a really competitive, established club, but not a BBL club. To do that, we needed the investment, and that's what Bristol Sport provided, and that's why Bristol Flyers are in the BBL now. So it varies a lot. It's not, as you say, like America, where or Premier League football, where you get loads of rich investors that just take their pick of a club that might be available and look to take that club over. It's usually more organic than that. It's usually built out of someone with a connection to the club. But it does vary quite a lot. Each club is very different in the BBL operationally.
And in terms of, I guess, coaching staff provision and playing provision, are they all full-time? Is it a mixture of roles? What does that look like? And I guess from club to club, you're going to have some that maybe have quite a lot of financial backing, and others maybe have to be a bit tight on the purse strings. How does that affect when you're trying to recruit, as you said, these players either from the UK or players from the NCAA or Europe who you're trying to get in to improve your team?
I think, again, I'll probably sound like a broken record saying it, but different to other sports, every club in the BBL is very, very different. You've got some of our clubs. So, for example, Surrey Scorchers, have a really big partnership with University of Surrey. So you have a few clubs in the league who have a big university partner. If you have that, obviously you suddenly have access to resources through that partnership. So that might be, like you say, physios and support staff for the first team. You have other clubs who don't have partnerships with universities and places like that, but maybe they have bigger resources, so they can look to employ more staff directly aside from any partnership with a university or an education program. So it varies a lot. Each, different clubs will be good at different things. You've got, some clubs very strong on the media side, but maybe not as strong on the playing side because of, resources. And then you'll have the exact opposite in other places. You'll have teams that you may be really good on the playing side, but not so good on the other side. So it's every team's probably got a few areas that they want to improve on. And that's the aim basically over the next few years, is for everyone to sort of bring the levels up of the areas that they're not as strong on, so that we sort of get everyone on a level playing field.
And would all the players in the BBL be full time?
Not all of them. A large percentage will. It is a professional top flight league. But similar to other sports, you'll see some players will still have other career paths on the side. It's a big gamble to throw everything just into professional sport, in any walk of life. But I think a lot of people still want to have you get a lot of, say, people that want to be like personal trainers, or a lot of people do like mentoring sort of roles like that sit nicely alongside being a basketball player, because it's difficult. You might have basketball, for those of you who don't know, is a sport where you can have multiple games in a week, and in the BBL you could have a game on the Friday and a game on the Saturday, or a game on the Saturday, game on the Sunday. So I mean, if you're trying to have a career alongside that, and you need to say, oh, I've suddenly now got a cup game next Friday, I need the day off work, it's a difficult situation. Whereas if you've got a job like a personal trainer or a mentor, or jobs where you're in control of your time, you can then adjust your diary and your calendar around that. So yeah, to answer your question, you get a lot of players that are professional. Most of the players that come from abroad are professional, but like a lot of the homegrown players may have careers alongside, because they've probably got roots in that area anyway, or in the UK anyway, so they might have other things they want to pursue alongside basketball, and it's not the be all and end all of their sort of career.
And does that present challenges for teams, I'd imagine, in terms of players trying to juggle that, or having some players that are full-time, others aren't? I imagine that has some difficulties that come along with it.
I think usually once a player's sort of made the decision to commit to that season and that team, they become part of that team for the season, and they usually have committed, on the basis that they can fit their other responsibilities around being a player for that team, and they've probably had that conversation with the coach, or with their job, or their partner, or whoever it is. So usually, you'll see, you wouldn't a lot of the time be able to watch a BBL game and say, okay, well, that player's probably full time, that player's not. They do really become part of the team, and usually be involved in the exact same way in all sorts of commercial requirements and things like that. You will have obviously occasional logistical issues, maybe with training, things like that, if they're trying to work around their work schedule. But I think most of the time now, most of the teams are professional, definitely the main core of the team. So that's not so much of an issue.
So I guess one of the big challenges for you in your role and the BBL as a whole is to try and grow the sport itself. If you look kind of at the NBA, obviously that's massive. You look at the NCAA, you've got March Madness, which is massive. You look at the continent, you've got the Euro League and stuff with Real Madrid, Barcelona, and the teams out there, which is huge. And to a certain degree, at least from the outside looking in, I could be wrong, it looks like England has struggled to a certain degree to get like a real good foothold into market share. Is that something you guys are trying to address? And is that something, I guess, how are you going to address that to try and make it increasingly popular for people to play and not just for you?
I think that's the really interesting thing about basketball in England is if you ask most people that are into sport, and even people that aren't into sport, do you like basketball? They'll probably say yes. And they probably would like to go and watch basketball. And they probably, most people say the classic, I played basketball at school and I really liked it. But then obviously once it comes off the curriculum in PE or whatever, then they're not going to go out and seek basketball. It has to sort of be put in front of them. So the really interesting sort of conundrum in England is basketball is a popular sport. It's a cool lifestyle sport as well. You'll see loads of people go around wearing the jerseys, wearing the hats with logos on. The appetite is there. I think the biggest thing about basketball in the UK is just exposure. And I think exposure is going to come from broadcast coverage and media coverage of the sport in the UK. And the more of that we get, the more people are going to be inspired by it, the more people are going to play it. I mean, at the moment, it's, there's a lot of stats that, put basketball as the second highest participation sport behind football in the UK, which surprises a lot of people, given you've got rugby, cricket and sports like that. But if you go down to a park and you see a street court, you'll see loads of people just playing. It's a really high participation sport, but even there, they'll all know NBA. They'll know NBA teams. They'll be, shouting LeBron's name when they take a shot and things like that. But how do we get them to actually go, well, look, there's a basketball team in your city. Why don't you go and watch them? It's awareness. And I think once we can get, the big thing that teams are focusing on in the BBL is really trying to sort out their venues. So you've got, Newcastle Eagles and Leicester Riders are now playing in their own arenas. Plymouth Raiders play at the Pavilions, London Lions play at the Copper Box. So more and more teams now are playing in venues which, if you just look at it, look like a really good basketball venue, either on camera or when you go there. It's more of an arena model than sort of a sports complex model. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, that's what teams are really going to focus on, because it's a domino effect. If everyone right now was playing in an arena that looked like an NBA arena, Sky Sports and BT Sport would look at your product and say, oh wow, this looks amazing, we want to put that on TV. If it's on TV, people like yourself will be scrolling through the channels and you'll see it, you'll watch a bit of it, and then you'll hopefully watch more of it. Suddenly we really grow the exposure in the product, and even highlights like huge dunks or game winning 3-pointers. If they go viral, you want the clip that goes viral to be the best visual quality clip that you can get. So that's the media coverage. Hopefully it's broadcast standard because it's been shown on a top broadcaster. So I think the exposure is the real big key. The more people that see it and know about it, but the domino effect of that is broadcast coverage, just media coverage in general. Things like local news channels, talking about the basketball results on the news after they've covered the football and the rugby. Social media outlets and channels. You've got channels like Joe and Bleacher Report, and they cover football so much. The more channels that are picking up bits of basketball highlights here and there. BBC Sport and Sky Sports are both talking about the BBL now. If you see the ticker on Sky Sports, it will mention the BBL. BBC Sport has a basketball section on the website. All of that is going to contribute to the awareness of it. And once people can watch games and be inspired by it, I think you'll see an even bigger spike in participation, and creating fans of the game, really.
And is that something that each club has tried to work together with, or is that something like the BBL as their own entity have tried to get greater exposure for the league itself?
I think it's a bit of both. I think the BBL for me is only as strong as the clubs. I think each club's trying to create, and it's not uniform. Each club will do different things. They'll put out different types of content at different frequencies. But I think it's really down to the clubs. If the clubs are producing great content, and shouting about what they're doing, highlights, making their players stars, so allowing you to get to know the players off the court and things like that. That content can be shared by the BBL. It can be collated into top 10 plays of the month, which are things that they do now. But without the clubs creating that content and pooling those resources into doing those types of things, the BBL doesn't have the content to collate at the end. I mean, if you follow Premier League football, for example, they might do top 10 goals of the month, but those goals would have been filmed by, for example, Sky Sports or BT Sport that the league has the partnerships with, and the clubs will be shouting about that footage and showing that footage on their channels. I think the club, it's down to the clubs really to lead the way, and then the BBL can really put that all together.
So looking at it in terms of a playing context, because obviously in an ideal world, you want this to kind of filter through where obviously, as you said, you get more participation, you get more homegrown players in the league and doing well and stuff. And then I guess moving forward, you'd want them to go into national teams or that type of stuff. How do you think that we could go about doing that? How do you think you could get to a stage where we're able to produce really good, young, talented players that can either excel in the BBL or potentially go and do really well in Europe or maybe even in the NBA?
So I think, there's a few strings to this. I mean, for myself, I didn't really get into basketball. I used to play, and I didn't really get into basketball properly till sort of like year 7 or 8. And it's tough in the way that, you will play it a little bit at school, but you've really got to enjoy it, because if you enjoy it at school, you've then got to go out and you've got to try and find yourself a club. And there's lots of basketball clubs about, but obviously there's nowhere near the same level of, for example, rugby clubs or football clubs in the UK. So it's how do you develop that passion for it that then makes you go out and really want to play it, and make the effort, probably speak to your parents and, make the effort to go and find a club. And I think, again, if when I was younger, and now obviously kids have access to social media so young, I think if you're seeing basketball highlights and you're seeing, info about basketball in the UK, I think that's going to inspire you so much more at a younger age, and you're going to get the kids that don't necessarily have the passion for football or rugby or cricket or other traditional sports, or even if they do, because kids play multiple sports, go out and try basketball. And I think the earlier we can get kids going out and trying basketball, like you say, the higher odds we're going to have to, for talent ID purposes and everything else, to find more players. Similarly, the more BBL clubs and National League clubs that we have in the UK, and there are a lot of clubs, the more there's going to be, Saturday sessions in your city and different areas of your city, the more you're going to have, all the BBL clubs run community programs. So, coaches will be going into schools and coaching basketball for a term. So, instead of getting a PE teacher, teaching basketball, which, some PE teachers are great at coaching basketball, but some won't have the expertise, you're actually getting a level 2 basketball coach come into your school. And, the level of coaching you're going to get there, and also the information, because they're going to be able to, identify kids that look like they could play club level, and they're going to funnel them off to those clubs. They're going to say, okay, look, why don't you go to the Bristol Flyers Saturday morning session, or the Plymouth Raiders, Tuesday night session. So you're going to find you've got a wider net cast effectively to find players that then get recommended to clubs. Speak to the parents and say, look, I think your kid's very tall, is very good. Why don't you try a Saturday morning session? So I think they're the sort of key growth indicators, and they're things that are increasing. All the BBL clubs and a lot of National League clubs have lots of grassroots coaching opportunities and school linked coaching opportunities as well.
And is that something that you think could be supported by like the top tier league? So I'm thinking, as an example, if you had people from the NBA come across to try and help grow the sport, if you could get hold of someone, maybe not LeBron James, because that would be, he's probably got a lot of laundry list of stuff we want to do. But if you could get hold of like a Jimmy Butler, who could then come and do, a tour around the UK to try and increase participation, or that type of stuff, is that something that you'd welcome, that type of support from that outside agency?
Yeah, I mean, the NBA, Europe and wider, obviously, but looking at our situation, Europe is a massive operation. They had the NBA UK game here, the London game, for a good few years. It's just moved to Paris now. But they run events and things like that where they come over. But I think it's about sort of sustained exposure. And I think if we can get, an NBA player over to England every now and then, that's amazing. I mean, Steph Curry was in London recently for an Under Armour event, I think. That's brilliant. But realistically, I think we can't expect the NBA to almost do it for us. And I think the feedback we get is, if you're a kid in school and, a 6'8" BBL player walks in full, tracksuit kit, and, there's a hoop and he goes and does a dunk and the kids can watch it, that kid doesn't know if it's, LeBron James, or if it's a BBL player, or if it's a Spanish league level player. They're just inspired by seeing this big athletic guy, do something really skillful and really powerful, really fast. And I think that's the key. I think that for the young kids, and that's, where we need to be inspiring people to play and to come and watch and to become fans and players of the game in the UK, they'll be inspired by a BBL player. So I think it's down to the clubs to really grow the game in their community. And the more clubs we have, the more communities we have, and the more work we're doing in those communities, just creating, it's creating a fan base. It's something Newcastle Eagles do really well in England. They run loads of leagues, loads of central venue leagues around Newcastle and the wider area. Those kids, they want to play basketball, they enjoy it, but when they grow up, they become fans, and they then go and watch the Newcastle Eagles games. So as well as Newcastle Eagles creating players in their community, they're also creating future fans. And obviously, hopefully, when those boys and girls grow up, their children then play, and their children then become fans, and it becomes the generational support that you get in football and other sports like that. But it's sustainable. It's not running a big marketing campaign and getting a load of people in to watch one game and then go. it's a lot more of a sustainable, if you're creating a basketball community in your city, you're creating a sustainable, resource for your club effectively to keep growing and to get bigger.
And is it long term? Would you like to go down like the academy route where each club's got an academy where they can filter through, or do you think that just trying to make it as wide a reach as you can and then naturally kind of drifting into a BBL team is a more efficient way to go?
A lot of clubs will have either their own academy or like an affiliate academy. Looking at our situation, we're based at SGS College, so there's an SGS College basketball academy. So we have, I think we've got 3 or 4 academy players training with us this season. One that played last season as well, and then we've got another player who was a former SGS College Academy student who went to play pro abroad, played in Israel, also played for a London team, and then has come back and playing for us now in a second year. So, the basketball academies around the UK are creating talent, BBL level talent. Our sort of club legends, a guy called Greg Street, and he went right through the sort of program in Bristol, played, Flyers juniors, went all the way through, and then became the captain and played with us for years through the other leagues and then in the BBL. So I think it's really important for clubs to have, an academy structure, because again, with the resources available in the league, if you can create some of your own players, that's a player you don't need to go out and sign from America. It's a player that already lives in your city, already wants to play for your club. So I think most clubs, Leicester Riders have a partnership with, they've got Charnwood, and they've also got Loughborough University. The university pathway is another one, because you'll get players who maybe aren't quite good initially to come to and play for your BBL team, or you're not aware that they're at that level, and then they go for the university team that you'll partner with and they play there, and actually you go, oh, this player could be good enough for the BBL team, so they can come across. So as well as the junior teams, and a lot of teams have women's teams and academy programs, second teams, things like that, having an academy is, in my opinion, a crucial piece of the puzzle, really, as we see in other sports.
And how does it compare to in Europe? Because obviously, if you look at the NBA at the moment, particularly a team that I like, the San Antonio Spurs, they're normally littered with foreign players that come across. And you think Tony Parker, Boris Diaw, etc. How does the UK compare and compete against some of the European countries? Because I know that they have quite a thirst for knowledge, quite a thirst for basketball, and obviously, at the moment, there seems to be quite a big import of players, even from places like Slovenia and Latvia and all those types of places. So you've got Porzingis and Luka Doncic, etc. So how do we compare to that? And if we're behind, how do we get to the stage where we're getting a lot of UK imports at the top level?
Well, I think, like you say, a lot of those countries that you mentioned, so especially Lithuania being one. I know you mentioned Latvia, but Lithuania, they have basketball is like, I think it's their national sport. It's so popular in some countries around Europe. And what I said about, in England, you might have tried it at school. They would have really played it at school. And a lot of those clubs in other countries, the PE setup, I think, in places like France and Greece is very different, where you do a lot of your activity with local clubs rather than doing it in-house. So, they might have at a very young age, had exposure to, a top Lithuanian, for example, a BBL club, coaching structure and facilities and even players and things like that. So they get inspired and coached and sort of, exposed to the pro level basketball in that country at such a young age in such an effective way. And then obviously the legacy of that is, you inspire more kids at a younger age, you create more stars, in the NBA. You've got, Giannis from, I'm not going to try and say his surname, but from Greece. And you've got, like you said about the Spurs, Manu Ginobili from Argentina, all these different countries. The more pros you have, Spain's a great example. There's loads of Spanish players in the NBA now. The more, pros you have at the top level, those guys get exposure in their national press and everything else, so that the kids see that and that inspires them and that makes them want to play, and they show more games on TV because obviously they've got a national interest in those games or those leagues. I think that's a big part of it. But I think it's about raising the interest and exposure in those countries, because you mentioned the other leagues. Outside of the NBA, you've got the NBL in Australia has become really, really big. NBA teams played against some of their teams in pre-season recently, and then you've got the EuroLeague, which is sort of like the Football Champions League, but it's more like a league that runs aside your league rather than just a cup competition. There's a lot more games. And that league is littered with teams like CSKA Moscow and Real Madrid and Barcelona, Bayern Munich, and these huge names, and all their players. For example, Bayern Munich will have loads of German players, Barcelona will have loads of Spanish players. So the BBL is a top flight league. It's a very fast league. It's a good league, but it's not EuroLeague level. And the domestic leagues of Spain, Russia, Greece are at a higher level than the BBL, but the BBL is creeping up. So what we've got to do is try and grow the league as much as we can, so that we're getting to the level of some of these leagues like France and Germany. And one of the big ways that happens is obviously, like I said before, about exposure. More people know about it, more people want to come watch it, more people will want to sponsor it, want to invest in it. More TV companies will want to show games at good times. And then it links back to the venue thing. Better venues attracts better players, attracts better sponsorship and TV audiences. People are more likely to, go and watch a game in your city if you just built a new arena or you've opened a new venue, than they will if, you're playing somewhere that they don't know about in a different part of the city, for example. It all sort of goes hand in hand, I think. And they're just a little bit ahead of us, some of those countries.
And are you quite optimistic? Are you optimistic that you guys are currently on the right route and that it's going to pay dividends in the long term?
Yeah, we are, because we're seeing results. I think, I mentioned venues. A few clubs have opened their own venues, or have really good partnerships with good venues. For example, Glasgow Rocks playing the Emirates Arena, and you've got people playing in really good arenas that other people are used to going and watching, gigs or comedy there and things like that. So it's putting on the map a lot more. The broadcasting interest. When I was younger, I never really accessed the BBL. There was a BBL player similar to NBA League Pass, which I didn't have. But then now, last few seasons, you've been able to watch every game home and away, streamed. You've had people like, you're getting more like BBC putting games on the red button and putting streaming games live online on their site. And there's other talks happening at the moment about new broadcast opportunities, I think. And I think the fact that that's all trending upwards and it feels quite sustainable. You see some sports leagues where they'll get a flash of investment and suddenly things will spike and go really good for a few years, and then they'll settle right down when that investment disappears. But the way I think the BBL and the clubs are growing at the moment is sustainably. They're not just spending a lot of money on little things. They're growing with the club, and other opportunities are happening as a result of that.
And I guess it's a positive if you can get to a stage where you're seeing it a lot more on TV, a lot more on Sky Sports, and raising that exposure. I guess the challenges you face, like you said, is you've got the EuroLeague, you've got the league in Australia, you've got China, etc. as well, who are also big in that. I guess the key for you guys is to just keep making sure you put a good product on, so people want to keep coming back.
Yeah, definitely. That's the thing. All we can do is keep improving. Keep improving different bits each season, so that when different teams receive investment or have access to a new facility and do all the things that we're talking about, new broadcast opportunities come about, that the product on the floor is good. And leading nicely into that is, a few years ago, Leicester Riders, entered a European competition, and now this year, we've got London Lions are in a European competition, and that's something that is a goal for a lot of the British clubs, is to become a team that competes in like football and other sports. There's a few different tiers of European competitions, and below the EuroLeague, you've got things like the Basketball Champions League, the Euro Cup, and there's opportunities there for British teams. And London Lions played one of their games recently and they lost very narrowly at the end. Leicester Riders had a lot of very close games, so we're not as far away from teams that, you know, people would say are established European teams as we think. It's just about the infrastructure behind these clubs, making that sustainable, so that rather than teams going into Europe for a year and then maybe coming back a few years later, we've got multiple teams in those leagues every year. And that's the goal, really.
And this could be completely ignorant, and if it is, tell me. Would you ever want to get to a stage where you had maybe older ex-NBA players coming across and playing in your league? I think if you look at the other way with football, you have a lot with MLS where players go out and play out there. I know obviously you've got examples. I think it's Stephen Marbury who went out to China and has played out there, and there's a few different people that have done that. Would you ever want to get to a stage where you had, you know, these high-profile ex-NBA players that are coming across and choosing the BBL to play in, or is that not something for the sustainability of the sport that would interest you guys?
I think it would depend on the situation. I mean, right now, with London Lions, I mentioned that, you know, they have a player called DeAndre Liggins, and you know, so I think they've got about two former NBA players on their roster this year. Byron Mullins, who's actually a British passport player, I think. And there's also a player called Kevin Ware, who was a really high profile NCAA Div 1 sort of college athlete, who had a very famous leg injury a few years ago. But so that is sort of already happening a little bit. The news was recycling the old footage of when Dennis Rodman came and played for the Brighton Bears a few years after he was in the English sort of celebrity Big Brother. I think it's good because obviously it creates a buzz. Again, it just comes down to that factor: is it sustainable? Would I rather, you know, BBL get a lot of attention because, you know, for a few years, a few NBA players come and teams sort of break the bank to get those players, and then they all disappear, and then the exposure sort of goes with it? Or would I rather, you know, teams are signing lots of good level American players, you know, who are in the prime of their career, and players from around Europe and Australia that, you know, that are really good in their, you know, at their peak, and it's creating a really good product that people want to show, and people are getting excited by. I think that's a bit more sustainable, and obviously more British players playing. We've had a lot more high profile British players come back to the BBL, because traditionally, you know, if you're a British player over a certain level, you might go and play in, you know, obviously you try and make the NBA maybe by going to college, and if you don't, they go and play in sort of other European leagues, France, for example, places like that. And we're seeing a lot of those British players come back now, because I think the standard of the game is growing to a point where those players are going, actually, I could play a similar level to this at home in London, where I'm from, rather than playing in, you know, Eastern Europe or France or somewhere else. And again, you've got the benefit of it being an English-speaking place with similar culture to America and Australia, which is very attractive to players. So sometimes we get very high-level players who, you know, they factor that into their decision and actually maybe come to us rather than a different league, because it's an attractive lifestyle as well. So that's another advantage we've got for, you know, for ourselves going forward.
Okay, well, it seems like obviously it's real positive in terms of the work that's being done and the profile of the sport. I guess something, and this is like more of a personal opinion on your front, but what's the differences between the playing style of Europe basketball or European basketball to NBA basketball? Because as I said, as a San Antonio fan, one of the things that Greg Popovich always mentions is that the European players are better at their fundamental type stuff. Do you see a clear difference between the basketball that's played, and what does that look like?
I do definitely. As you sort of said, it's creeping into the NBA a bit more because there's so many international players in the NBA now. You know, so it's and similarly as there's more and more American players playing in the European leagues, so they're starting to converge a little bit. But and when I think NBA and I think America, I think there's, you know, some of the best athletes I've ever seen. People like LeBron James and, you know, Giannis, and some of, you know, obviously Michael Jordan back in the day, players like that. They're just, it's freakish athleticism, and you see that a lot more commonly in the NBA. Obviously, you've got the whole of America as a talent pool, and I think there's a lot more one-on-one play, a lot more really athletic, skillful play in the NBA, I'd say. And then in Europe, you get a lot more the fundamental talent, you know, really good ball movement, you know, really attractive basketball, lots of passing, waiting for the right shot, running lots of plays. But I think as the big thing that's crept into the NBA now, as well as in Europe, there's a lot of players who, no matter how tall they are, they play like guards. They play, they shoot threes, they can dribble. I think in the past in the NBA, if you were above a certain height and build, you were considered, a big man, and therefore your job was to, get under the basket and use your power to get to the basket and finish. Now, big men in the NBA are expected to, be able to dribble, be able to shoot, just like the smaller players. And I think that's a huge, influence from all the European people coming in. People like you mentioned Porzingis. He's 7'2", I think, or similar, and he can shoot three pointers like anyone can. And I think the American players have gone, well, hold on a minute, well, what are these European guys coming? I need to learn to do this. So it's rubbing off on how they play in America. Similarly, European players and English players growing up watching people like Steph Curry and James Harden that will shoot 3-pointers from anywhere. That if anyone had tried that when I was younger, they would have said, like, why are you shooting from there? That's an awful shot. But they're seeing people do it in the NBA and the analytics support it. They're going to start doing that more. So you're going to get more European guys. People like Luka Doncic, who's growing up in Europe, but he'll shoot from miles away. That will be an influence on him watching American players. So it's starting to converge a little bit, but I think they're the main differences, I would say.
That will help the crossover for like European players or British-based players. Do you think it will help that the games are becoming a bit closer? Because I'd imagine, and again, I don't know the underlying things of this player, so I could be completely wrong. But you take someone like Ryan Richards, who was drafted by San Antonio. His skill set may be completely different to what an NBA center looked like, or what at that time what an NBA player could do with their skill set. Do you think by it being more collaborative across the globe, that will help players make those transitions across leagues and across continents?
I think so, yeah, because like anything, with football, for example, you sort of think, if you grow up in England playing football and you're good enough, you can translate to most leagues. You might have to, go into different tactics and a different system, but a lot of the skills, are quite similar. Whereas if you look at football and you've got the argument about lower league football and, people going in the air a lot, going long ball sort of, stereotypes, and then trying to translate to maybe going in Spain, where everyone plays it on the floor and, tackling's, not as preferential as, say, an interception, things like that. With basketball, I think it's not as bad. I think a lot of if you're growing up in England, you play, again, like I said earlier, you're going to be watching the NBA. So you're probably going to end up playing like an NBA player. So the next generation of English basketball players are probably going to be shooting so many 3-pointers from everywhere. It's because they're going to be copying what the NBA is doing. Where they might struggle a little bit is obviously similar to some American players, is if they then, aim for the NBA and end up settling at maybe European level, is do they have the fundamental side of the game as much? Because again, it's just drilled into players in Europe so much, and they're so good with their fundamentals and their sort of skill set. But yeah, I think, like you say, as the two become more similar, and hopefully as people in England are watching not just NBA but also European basketball and seeing European basketball players like Luka Doncic get to the NBA, that they're going to be copying the best bits from all of those players, you hope, and that's going to sort of negate the issues you'd have.
I'm hoping that we see a few Shaquille O'Neal types come back into the NBA. That will ruffle a few feathers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a bad thing. I think that everyone shooting from everywhere is brilliant, and it's meaning the scoring's going up and everything. But I think you do want that balance. I think a lot of people still want to see some big men, as you call it, going in and scoring close to the basket, because it just varies what you're watching, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, agreed. And I also think, I'm sure you watched The Last Dance documentary, as a lot of us did. It was really interesting to see kind of the physical nature of, the pounding you can get by going into the paint. It seems like a little bit at the moment that's coming away from the game because, as you said, a lot of 3-pointers, a lot of pick and rolls to get 3-pointers and stuff, where sometimes having that battle down low, it just brings a different product and different view set. How does James Harden deal with having to go into the paint where he might get a clobber? How does Giannis deal with having a 7'1" big man who's quite big trying to swat his shots away? You know, it makes the game more interesting for the viewers and presents different challenges for the players, which I think is great.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, when you watch sport, you want to see varied, you know, within the sport, you want to see a variation of sort of tactics and styles, don't you? I mean, when you watch football or you watch rugby, you know, Bristol Bears are really, you know, renowned for playing very sort of flair rugby. You know, moving the ball, lots of quick passes, really quick play. Whereas, you know, other teams are more traditional and they want to use their power and use their weight to really, you know, sort of grind teams down. And I think in the NBA, you see that more in the playoffs. Once it gets to crunch time, teams that maybe have been doing something that's worked all season. So, for example, the Houston Rockets not really having any big players and playing small ball, as they call it. You know, sometimes when you get to the playoffs and the Lakers had a few 7-footers they could throw on, they didn't really have an answer for it. And I think the playoffs in the NBA and the BBL is where those sort of tactics and having that versatility as, you know, as a lineup becomes really important. And I think that's what you see with good teams in any sport, is just having that ability to mix it up and play differently. I think sometimes if you're one-dimensional, you know, you can get found out if you're playing one team a lot, because they can work little things out, and it's nice for you to have a plan B to go to.
Yeah, and no, I agree. And I think what's interesting in the NBA, obviously you have 7-game series, which, you know, Houston Rockets playing small ball, you might win a couple of games in that series, but are you going to be able to go and do that over 7 and get all 4, which becomes interesting. I guess before I ask you my last question, before I let round up, because we're getting quite on time, who do you think will win next year?
I think I don't like to say it, but I think the Clippers will win. I think LA Clippers. I think this year there's been a bit of a narrative that they thought they'd already won, so they weren't sort of taking it as seriously as they should have in the NBA bubble that they had. But if they keep that, you know, it looks like that team staying together. I just think they're going to have to come out this year with a real chip on their shoulder, answer all the critics. I think a lot of people thought they would win this year. I think they had the talent to win this year. I think they're the most talented team in the playoffs. So I think my first choice would be them, and then my more out there choice is Golden State Warriors, just because this year they, you know, had so many of their players injured or not playing, and that they finished so low that they obviously got that quite high draft pick, which they can obviously either get a talented young player or trade that for someone else as part of a package. With everyone back and rested from a year away, I think they're going to be right up there this year. And then Lakers, I think, again, have got a good chance. I think they just maybe could try and do a move or two just to strengthen and get a little bit more depth.
I think one of the interesting things about the Clippers is getting rid of Doc Rivers. I don't know if you've seen the Playbook documentaries on Netflix. And he was speaking on there. It's a series of coaches talking about different facets of coaching, and his was really interesting. But I was really surprised when they got rid of him. I didn't really understand the sense that it made in terms of he's a coach who's been there, done it all, and you seem like after one particularly unique year, you've kind of given him the chop.
Yeah, there seems to be a narrative with Doc Rivers that he obviously he won with the Boston Celtics, that really good team, but he's had a few talented teams with the Clippers who a lot of people thought maybe should have at least been in the finals or should have won. Back in the Chris Paul, Blake Griffin days, and obviously this team now, and I think maybe unfairly, but there seems to be a narrative created, which is, can he really get you over that hump? And I think in sport, that just becomes a narrative, doesn't it? And then people seem to, the blame has to fall with someone, and it's not going to fall with Kawhi Leonard or Paul George, I don't think, because they've just been signed and they want them there together long term, sort of came in together. So I think, they've decided to put it on him and try something new with Ty Lue. But I think with that group of players, I think they'll take it more seriously this year, they won't be as complacent. I think they'll be up there. But no, it's a good point. He's a very well respected coach. He's picked up another job already, I think.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting next year. I think obviously not a lot of people thought Miami would get all the way through. I think there was a lot of talks of the Bucks and stuff getting through. I know the Philly as well, 76ers were up there. But I think it'll be interesting. You've got Brooklyn Nets with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Obviously, that'll be an interesting dynamic there. As you said, Golden State Warriors coming back in. You've got the Mavs with Doncic being another year older, and obviously a bit more chemistry with Porzingis will be interesting. So I think providing the Golden State Warriors don't go on another rampage like they did for a few years under Steve Kerr, I think basketball health in the NBA is really interesting. It's quite a wide open competition, which is nice to see.
Yeah, they would definitely be another wild card. I spoke about that with a few friends. They've got, especially having the coaching staff, having Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni, who sort of revolutionized how teams play, really quick, really high scoring basketball. He had invented the 7-second offense pretty much in Phoenix with Phoenix Suns back in the day, where basically he wanted the team to shoot shots within 7 seconds, which is incredibly fast. When you've got a 24-second shot clock to use effectively, having him on the coaching staff is just whether that works with him being a head coach who's sort of there as an assistant coach when the head coach Steve Nash is quite inexperienced and used to play for that coach. I just don't know how there's going to be a lot of characters and a lot of egos, a lot of stars in one place. If they can get it to work, then they're going to be right up there. But there's a few things that could go wrong, I think. But yeah, they're going to be exciting to watch this year as well.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think all of those people you've mentioned, minus maybe Steve Nash, has got a big question mark in terms of their thing. Like D'Antoni is, can he win it all? Kevin Durant is always around. Did he just jump ship and join a rival to win championships? Can he win one by himself? Kyrie Irving's obviously his attitude and whatnot in Boston and a few other bits. So I think if they can all pull together as a us versus them type mentality, they could be good. But you can equally see it going down in flames as well. So I think that would be a really interesting one to see how the Brooklyn Nets go.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. So last question, which I ask everyone, and it'd be obviously interesting to hear your thoughts on this. Who's the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Oh, see, that's more of an athlete question, isn't it? So you have to think a bit harder.
You could go, if you want to go seen live, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll go see, because unfortunately, whilst I like to think I was a good athlete in a few different sports, I think a lot of the people I played against or sort of worked with won't be well known. But I think I've seen LeBron James, play a few times. Obviously, so basketball's my favorite sport, and I've watched him live when we had the 2012 Olympics. I was lucky enough to watch Team USA, and I actually watched Team USA play GB in an exhibition match in Manchester, and I was sat really close for that. And since last year watched him in LA as well. I think he for me is probably, everyone says Jordan's greatest. I wasn't, obviously I didn't watch Jordan play when he was in his prime. So for me, LeBron James is one of the greatest athletes I've seen. I think I really like football, and there's a lot of footballers I think are amazing. Obviously Ronaldo and Messi, but I think with basketball only having 5 people on such a small court, you get such a huge showcase of what that player can do, and the spotlight's on them so much more than it might be in a 15-person aside or 11-a-side game. And I think as well, I think growing up in the era of this level of media scrutiny, and just seeing how, when he or other people I watch just get slated when they miss a game-winning shot or when they move team, I think watching his whole career and how hated he was when he went to Miami and then winning twice, and how hated he was in different series and different situations. I think he's answered every question, and I think the most impressive thing for me is just the lack of scandal. He seems to have just done everything by the book. He's created a university in his home place of Akron in Ohio. And obviously really involved now with, you know, More Than a Vote and Black Lives Matter, and how much activism he's managed to sort of do off the court. He's, you know, employed so many of his friends into key roles, rather than just giving them money. He's actually given them roles and careers. I think it's so impressive, probably more than just basketball as well, that I would say he would be my choice, I think.
Perfect. That sounds like a good one to me. I think it'll definitely go down as one of the best to do it. And as you said, all the activism stuff that he does, particularly support of the younger people in his area where he grew up. I know he's done a lot with schools and universities and stuff, which is amazing. So yeah, and it sounds good. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time, and obviously I hope you guys can start your season soon and everything kind of get all cleared up and stuff. But yeah, it's been a great conversation. I hope we can catch up again soon.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.